My name is Emma, and the day I discovered what my grandfather had really left me wasn't the day of his funeral, or during some formal reading of the will. It was 3 years later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when I found a dusty leather journal hidden inside an antique desk that no one in my family had wanted. That journal changed everything, and looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how clueless my parents were when they decided to give my supposed inheritance to my brother Daniel without even asking me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the small town of Mapleton, where everyone knew everyone's business, I was always the sensible one in the Walsh family. From the time I was little, I was the child who saved her allowance instead of spending it on candy, who got straight A's without my parents having to nag me about homework, and who started working part-time jobs as soon as I turned 16. My brother Daniel, 2 years younger than me, was the opposite. Charming, impulsive, and constantly jumping from one grand scheme to another. Don't get me wrong, I loved my brother. But the contrast in how our parents treated us was impossible to ignore. When Daniel wanted to drop out of college to find himself through a backpacking trip across Europe, my parents funded the entire adventure. When I worked 2 jobs to put myself through business school, they called it good experience, and told me how proud they were that I was so independent. It was always like that. Daniel's dreams required family support, while mine were expected to be self-sufficient. Grandpa. Henry, my father's father, was different though. He and I had a special bond that went beyond the typical grandparent-grandchild relationship. He had built a successful carpentry business from nothing, working with his hands well into his 70s, crafting beautiful furniture that was sought after throughout the state. Some of my favorite childhood memories were the Saturday afternoons I spent in his workshop, learning how to sand wood until it felt like velvet beneath my fingertips, how to measure twice and cut once, how to see the potential in a rough piece of timber. "You've got the eye, Emma," he'd tell me, his voice gruff but warm. "You can see what something could be, not just what it is. That's rare." Daniel never had the patience for the workshop. He'd come in, ask a few questions, get sawdust on his designer shoes, and leave within 15 minutes. But I soaked up every lesson, every technique, every story Grandpa Henry shared. When Grandpa died 3 years ago, just after my 27th birthday, I was devastated. He had been sick for a while, cancer that started in his lungs and spread faster than anyone expected, but the loss still felt sudden and overwhelming. The funeral was a blur of tearful relatives, casseroles dropped off by neighbors, and the strange, hollow feeling that comes when someone who has always been part of your life suddenly isn't anymore. The reading of the will happened a week later, in the wood-paneled office of Mr. Patterson, Grandpa's attorney since before I was born. I sat next to my parents on one side of a massive oak conference table, ironically, one that Grandpa had crafted years ago as a commission for the law firm, with Daniel across from us, his girlfriend Meredith by his side. Mr. Patterson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat before beginning. "To my son Richard and his wife Diane," he read in a formal tone, "I leave the sum of $50,000 in my collection of first edition books." My father nodded solemnly. He had expected this. The books had been a shared passion between father and son. "To my grandson Daniel," Mr. Patterson continued, "I leave my tools and equipment, along with my workshop property on Oak Street." My brother's eyes widened slightly. The workshop was in the historic district downtown and worth a considerable amount as real estate alone. I waited for my name, a small knot of anticipation in my stomach. Grandpa and I were close. Surely he had thought of me too. But as Mr. Patterson shuffled his papers and mentioned some distant cousins who received small mementos, it became clear that there was nothing specific for me in the will. No money, no property, no special bequest that acknowledged our bond. "And the remainder of my estate," Mr. Patterson concluded, including all other assets and properties not specifically named, shall be placed in a family trust administered by Richard Walsh to be distributed according to family needs and circumstances. And that was it. I felt my mother pat my hand sympathetically as we stood to leave. "Don't worry, honey," she whispered. "Dad will make sure you're taken care of through the trust." I nodded mechanically, trying to process the strange hurt that was blooming inside me. It wasn't about the money. I had a good job as a project manager at a construction firm, a decent apartment, and savings of my own. It was about the recognition, the acknowledgement of the relationship I thought Grandpa and I had shared. Had I imagined how special it was? The question gnawed at me during the drive home, but I pushed it aside, chalking it up to grief making everything feel worse than it was. Life went on. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and earning a promotion within 6 months of Grandpa's death. Daniel, meanwhile, let the workshop sit empty while he figured out what to do with it. The tools gathered dust, and the space that had once been filled with the smell of sawdust and the sound of Grandpa humming old folk songs while he worked remained silent and abandoned. About a year after the funeral, Daniel announced at Sunday dinner that he had a brilliant business opportunity. He wanted to open a high-end cocktail bar with a speakeasy theme in the downtown area. The workshop building, with its exposed brick walls and central location, would be perfect for conversion. "It'll be the kind of place that puts Mapleton on the map," he explained enthusiastically, gesturing with his fork. "Craft cocktails, live jazz on weekends, a secret entrance through a bookcase. Very exclusive, very cool." My parents exchanged glances. "Sounds interesting, son," my father said cautiously. "But starting a restaurant or bar business is risky. The failure rate is incredibly high, even for experienced owners." Daniel waved away the concern. "That's why I've partnered with Trevor. You remember my roommate from sophomore year? His family owns that restaurant group in Chicago. He knows the business inside and out. How much would it cost to convert the workshop and get everything up and running?" my mother asked, ever practical. Daniel hesitated. "Well, that's the thing. We've run the numbers, and we need about $250,000 for the renovation and initial operating costs. I've got some investors interested, but I need to show I have skin in the game too." $250,000? I couldn't help but interject. "Daniel, that's a massive investment for a first-time business owner in a town this size." Shot me an irritated look. "Not everyone wants to play it safe their whole life, Emma. Sometimes you have to take risks to make something happen." My father cleared his throat. "Actually, there might be a way to make this work." He turned to my mother. "The family trust from Dad's estate. We haven't touched it yet, and it was meant to help with exactly this kind of thing. A new family business venture." I stared at him, a strange feeling settling in my stomach. "Wait, are you saying you want to use Grandpa's money to fund Daniel's bar?" "It's not just Daniel's bar," my brother corrected. "It would be a family business. You could even get involved if you wanted to, Emma." "That's right," my father agreed, warming to the idea. "This could be a great opportunity for both of you. Daniel handling the creative side, and Emma, with your organizational skills and business degree, you could help with the operational aspects." I sat back in my chair, feeling like I had somehow slipped into an alternate reality. Dad, Grandpa's workshop was his pride and joy. He spent 50 years building furniture there, creating pieces that will be in homes for generations. And you want to turn it into a trendy bar with a fake bookcase entrance? My mother reached over to pat my hand. "Honey, your grandfather was a practical man. He would have wanted his assets to benefit the family, not sit idle out of some sense of sentimentality." "But Daniel doesn't know the first thing about running a business," I protested. "He's never stuck with anything longer than 6 months." "No offense," I added, glancing at my brother. "Full offense taken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel shot back. Just because I'm not content pushing papers in some corporate cubicle doesn't mean I can't build something successful. This isn't about your career choices, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It's about respecting Grandpa's legacy and making responsible decisions with what he left behind. My father sighed deeply. Emma, I understand you were close to Dad. We all were. But as the trustee, it's my job to determine how best to use these assets for the family's benefit. Daniel has a solid business plan, a partner with industry experience, and the drive to make this work. I think your grandfather would have been proud to see his grandson taking an entrepreneurial leap, and just like that, it was decided. Despite my objections, my father committed $200,000 from Grandpa's trust to Daniel's cocktail bar venture. The remaining $50,000 was set aside as a safety net in case of unexpected expenses. My input was noted, considered, and ultimately dismissed. Over. The next several months, I watched from the sidelines as Grandpa's beloved workshop was gutted. The workbenches where he had taught me to carve and join were dismantled. The walls where he had hung his favorite tools were knocked down to open up the space. The small office in the corner where he kept his sketches and design plans was converted into a storage room for liquor deliveries. Each time I drove past the construction, I felt a pang in my chest, not just for the loss of the physical space that held so many memories, but for what felt like the erasure of my connection to Grandpa himself. Daniel had not only inherited the property, but now all of Grandpa's money too, while I was left with... what? Memories and the vague invitation to help run my brother's vanity project? I declined to get involved in the bar, focusing instead on my own career and trying not to let resentment poison my relationship with my family. But it was hard, especially when my parents talked endlessly about how proud they were of Daniel for taking initiative and building something from scratch, as if converting a property he was given for free with money he didn't earn was some kind of self-made success story. The bar, which Daniel named Henry's, in what I'm sure he thought was a touching tribute to our grandfather, opened with great fanfare 6 months later. The local newspaper ran a feature about the transformation of a traditional workshop into a cutting-edge nightlife destination. There was a quote from my father about how, "My father, Henry Walsh, always believed in innovation and moving forward," which made me laugh bitterly when I read it. Grandpa had used the same tools for 40 years because he believed, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I went to the grand opening out of familial obligation, standing awkwardly in a corner with an overpriced cocktail named The Carpenter, whiskey with maple syrup and wood smoke essence. Grandpa would have hated it. Watching, Daniel hold court in the center of the room. My parents beamed with pride, introducing themselves to everyone as the owner's parents, and telling anyone who would listen how Daniel had such vision and was revitalizing the downtown area. No one mentioned that none of this would have been possible without Grandpa's money. No one acknowledged that the successful business my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands had been dismantled to make way for exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting fixtures. And certainly, no one seemed to remember that I existed, except when they needed someone to take group photos for social media. I left early, driving aimlessly around town to clear my head before ending up on a quiet street lined with oak trees. Without consciously deciding to, I had parked in front of the address listed on the card Mr. Patterson had given me after the will reading, Grandpa's home. Unlike the workshop, the house had been sold shortly after his death, the proceeds going into the family trust that was now funding Daniel's venture. But as I sat there in my car, staring at the modest 2-story Craftsman with its new paint job and unfamiliar porch furniture, I remembered something I had completely forgotten in the whirlwind of grief and subsequent family drama. Grandpa had asked me to clear out his desk before the house was sold, a small secretary desk that had been in his bedroom, Nothing valuable or particularly special compared to the larger pieces he had crafted over the years. "Just make sure you're the one who empties it, Emma," he had told me during one of our last visits, his voice weak but insistent. "There are things in there I'd like you to have." I had meant to do it, but in the chaos following his death, the funeral arrangements, returning to work, helping my parents sort through his belongings, the task had somehow slipped through the cracks. By the time I remembered, the house had been cleared out, its contents either distributed according to the will, donated, or discarded. The desk, deemed too small and old-fashioned to be of interest to anyone, had ended up in my parents' attic, forgotten along with Grandpa's request. Until now. That memory hit me like a physical force as I sat in my car, and suddenly I knew what I needed to do. I drove straight to my parents' house, not caring that it was nearly midnight. I used my emergency key to let myself in, climbed the pull-down ladder to the attic, and flicked on the lone light bulb that illuminated the dusty space. And there it was, pushed against the far wall under a sheet, Grandpa's secretary desk. My heart pounding, I pulled off the sheet and ran my hands over the familiar wood, remembering how Grandpa had shown me the hidden compartments he had built into it as a young craftsman, eager to demonstrate his skill with secret drawers and false bottoms. Using techniques he had taught me years ago, I began exploring the desk methodically, pressing panels that looked solid but weren't, sliding out drawers and checking beneath and behind them, tapping sections to listen for hollow sounds. And in a concealed compartment beneath the central drawer, a space that would have remained undetected by anyone who didn't know exactly where to look, I found it. A leather-bound journal with my name written on the first page in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. To Emma, it read, who always understood the value of patience, precision, and seeing the potential in raw materials. My true inheritance was never meant to be found in a lawyer's office. With trembling hands, I opened the journal fully and began to read, not yet understanding that what I held was worth far more than anything my brother had received, and that my parents had no idea what Grandpa had really left me. The attics. Dim light barely illuminated the pages as I carefully turned them one by one, my fingers tracing Grandpa Henry's neat architectural handwriting. This wasn't just any journal. It was a detailed chronicle spanning decades, containing everything from sketches of furniture designs to receipts for lumber purchases to photographs of completed pieces. But most importantly, it contained something I never expected, a map to Grandpa's true legacy. Emma, the first entry addressed me directly, dated just 6 months before his death. If you're reading this, then you've remembered my instructions about the desk. I've always known you were the only one who would truly understand what I've built over my lifetime. What follows is the story of treasures hidden in plain sight, treasures that belong to you alone. I sank down onto an old ottoman, dust puffing, up around me as I tried to process what I was reading. According to Grandpa's journal, he had been quietly building an empire that no one in the family knew about. While everyone thought of him as just a small-town craftsman making custom furniture, he had been strategically investing in properties and businesses across 3 counties for over 40 years. "I never told your father about most of this," Grandpa wrote. "Richard is a good man with a kind heart, but he lacks vision. He would have wanted me to sell everything and put the money in government bonds or some such nonsense. And your brother, well, Daniel reminds me too much of my own brother Thomas. Charming, ambitious, but always looking for shortcuts. I watched Thomas squander everything our parents left him within 5 years. I won't make the same mistake with what I've built." The journal detailed how Grandpa had purchased his first investment property, a rundown Victorian house near the university, when he was just 30 years old. He renovated it himself on weekends, using scraps from his furniture commissions. To reduce costs, he rented it to students, reinvested the profits, and repeated the process again and again. By the time of his death, according to the journal, Grandpa owned 27 properties across Mapleton and the neighboring towns of Riverside and Harper's Creek. Most were managed by a property management company under an LLC named Walsh Heritage Holdings, a company I had never heard of, but was apparently now the sole owner of, according to the documents tucked into the back of the journal. "I've arranged everything through my attorney, Marcus Fleming," the journal explained. "Not Patterson. He handles the family affairs that everyone knows about. Fleming manages the holdings that I'm leaving to you. The transition will be seamless and private. All you need to do is call him when you find this journal." I flipped to the back of the journal with shaking hands and found a business card for Marcus Fleming, attorney at law, with a handwritten note on the back. "Call anytime. I'm expecting your call." My mind was reeling. It was nearly 1 in the morning, but I couldn't wait until business hours. This had to be some kind of mistake or elaborate joke. I pulled out my phone and called the cell number on the card, expecting to reach a disconnected line or a confused stranger. Instead, a professional voice answered on the 3rd ring. Fleming speaking. Hi. This is Emma Walsh. I'm sorry to call so late, but I just found my grandfather Henry Walsh's journal, and it said I should contact you immediately." There was a pause, and then, "Ms. Walsh, we've been waiting for your call for quite some time." I was beginning to wonder if Henry's message had gotten lost. My heart pounded. So it's true? Everything in the journal about the properties and the company? Indeed. Walsh Heritage Holdings is very real, and as of 3 years ago, you are its sole owner and beneficiary. Perhaps we should meet tomorrow to go over the details. How does 9 o'clock work for you? I agreed to the meeting in a daze, hung up, and sat staring at the journal until the attic's single bulb began to hurt my eyes. My grandfather, the man who everyone thought had left me nothing, had secretly made me the heir to a real estate portfolio that, based on the numbers in the journal, was worth several $1,000,000. The question wasn't just why he had kept it secret from everyone else. That much was clear from his writings about my father's conservative financial approach and his concerns about Daniel. The bigger question was, why hadn't he told me? Why the elaborate secrecy, the hidden journal, the separate lawyer? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? I carefully put the journal in my bag, closed up the attic, and left my parents' house as quietly as I had entered. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with implications and possibilities. By morning, I had made my decision. I would meet with Fleming, verify everything, and then decide how to proceed. If this turned out to be real, I wasn't sure I would tell my family right away. After all, they hadn't hesitated to direct Grandpa's known assets to Daniel without considering my feelings. Marcus Fleming's office was nothing like Patterson's wood-paneled traditional law firm. Located in a converted warehouse in the Arts District of Harper's Creek, the space was modern and minimalist, with concrete floors, exposed ductwork, and furniture that looked like it belonged in an Architectural Digest feature. Much of it, I realized with a pang, crafted by Grandpa himself. Henry was one of my first clients when I started my practice 15 years ago, Fleming explained as he led me to a conference room dominated by a massive table made from a single slab of walnut. He came to me specifically because he wanted legal counsel separate from the family's lawyer. He said he needed someone who understood that sometimes the greatest legacies aren't the ones announced at formal readings of wills. Over the next 2 hours, Fleming walked me through the extent of what Grandpa had built and what he had left me. Walsh Heritage Holdings owned not just residential rental properties, but also 3 commercial buildings in downtown Harper's Creek, a small office complex in Riverside, and 50 acres of undeveloped land on the outskirts of Mapleton that was becoming increasingly valuable as the town expanded. The portfolio generates approximately $42,000 in net income every month after all expenses, property management fees, and maintenance costs, Fleming explained, sliding a financial summary across the table. The funds have been accumulating in the company accounts since Henry's passing, as per his instructions. You now have access to about $1.5 million in liquid assets, in addition to the properties themselves, which are conservatively valued at around $8.3 million. I stared at the numbers, trying to make them make sense. I had gone from feeling overlooked and dismissed to discovering I was a millionaire many times over in the span of 12 hours. But why didn't he tell me while he was alive? I asked, voicing the question that had kept me awake all night. Why go through all this secrecy? Fleming smiled slightly. Henry was concerned about how this information might affect you and your relationship with your family. He wanted you to establish yourself independently first, to know your own capabilities without the cushion of wealth. But he also worried that if everyone knew what he was leaving you, there would be complications. You mean my family would have tried to get their hands on it, I translated bluntly. Those are your words, not mine, Fleming replied diplomatically. But Henry was explicit that you were to be the sole beneficiary and decision-maker for these assets. He believed you were the only one with the right combination of business sense and ethical grounding to manage his legacy properly. As if anticipating my next question, Fleming pulled out a sealed envelope. Henry left this for you as well. He asked that I give it to you only after you understood the full scope of your inheritance. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers to find a letter written in the same precise handwriting as the journal. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then Marcus has explained your inheritance, and you're probably wondering why I kept all this from you while I was alive. I hope you'll forgive an old man's need to protect what he built, not just from those who might squander it, but also from the burden it might have placed on you too early in your journey. I've watched you grow from a curious little girl into a capable, determined woman. You remind me of myself at your age, practical, hardworking, with an eye for quality and a respect for craftsmanship that goes beyond the physical act of building things. You understand that anything worthwhile takes time, patience, and care to construct properly, whether it's a piece of furniture or a financial future. Your father never had that understanding. He sees only what's right in front of him, not the potential in the raw materials of life. And Daniel has his own path to walk, and it's not the one I could entrust with the fruits of my lifetime of work. What I've left you isn't just property and money, it's opportunity and responsibility. Use it wisely. Build something meaningful. And remember that the most valuable things we create are rarely the ones that can be seen at first glance. With love and faith in you, Grandpa Henry, I folded the letter carefully, unexpected tears blurring my vision. Even now, 3 years after his death, Grandpa was still teaching me, still guiding me with his wisdom. So what happens now? I asked, Fleming, once I had composed myself. That's entirely up to you, he replied. You can maintain things as they are, with the property management company handling the day-to-day operations. You can sell some or all of the properties. You can reinvest the income into new acquisitions. As Henry's heir, these decisions are yours alone to make. I nodded slowly, still processing. I'd like to keep this private for now, I said after a moment. My family doesn't need to know just yet. Fleming nodded. Of course. Discretion was one of Henry's primary concerns. All communications regarding Walsh Heritage Holdings can be directed through this office, and the company structure provides a layer of privacy that would make it difficult for anyone to connect the assets directly to you without inside information. I left Fleming's office with a thick folder of documents, a set of keys to a storage unit containing additional records, and a spinning head. Within the span of 12 hours, my understanding of my grandfather and my place in my family had been completely upended. As I drove back to my apartment, I passed by Henry's, my brother's cocktail bar that had been Grandpa's workshop. It was closed at this hour, but a delivery truck was unloading cases of liquor at the side entrance. The historic brick facade had been maintained, but a sleek modern sign now hung where Grandpa's hand-carved wooden workshop sign had once been, the one that read, Walsh Woodworking, set 1963, with small tools carved into the corners. For the first time since the bar opened, I didn't feel a stab of resentment at the sight. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Daniel had gotten what he thought was the prize, a prime piece of real estate and a hefty sum to fund his latest venture. But he had no idea that it was just a fraction of what Grandpa had built. He had no idea that the quiet, practical grandfather he had barely spent time with had been quietly amassing a small fortune right under everyone's noses. And my parents, so quick to direct the family trust toward Daniel's business. They had no idea that their decision to exclude me had been counterbalanced by Grandpa's much larger decision to entrust me with the bulk of his life's work. I almost pulled into the bar's parking lot, tempted to walk in and tell Daniel everything, to see the look on his face when he realized that his inheritance was a drop in the bucket compared to mine. But that wasn't what Grandpa would have wanted. He hadn't built his empire to create family discord or to elevate one grandchild over another out of spite. He had made a careful decision based on who he thought would be the best steward of what he had created. Instead of stopping, I drove home, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down with the folder of documents Fleming had given me. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to proceed. The properties were one thing, tangible assets with clear value. But as I read through the paperwork, I discovered there was even more to the story. Grandpa had not only invested in real estate, but had also acquired minority stakes in several local businesses over the years. He owned 15% of the Riverside Lumber Mill, which supplied materials to builders across the state. He had a 20% share in Lakeside Retreat, a small but exclusive resort on the outskirts of Harper's Creek. And most surprisingly, he owned 30% of Patterson's Brewery, the craft beer operation that supplied most of the restaurants in the area, including, ironically, Daniel's bar. The more I learned, the more I understood Grandpa's methodical approach to building wealth. He hadn't made flashy investments or chased get-rich-quick opportunities. He had identified solid local businesses with growth potential, invested at the ground level, and held on to his stakes for decades, allowing them to appreciate quietly while he continued to be known simply as the town's master furniture maker. T was brilliant, really. No one had any idea of his wealth because he had never flaunted it. He had lived in the same modest house for 50 years, driven the same truck for 20, and worked with his hands every day not because he had to, but because he loved it. The money had never been the point for him. It was the creation, the building of something lasting that had driven him. By the time I finished going through the documents, night had fallen, and my phone showed 3 missed calls, 1 from my mother and 2 from Daniel. I wasn't ready to talk to either of them yet. I needed time to figure out what to do with this newfound knowledge and responsibility. I sent a quick text to both of them. Sorry, busy with a work project. I'll call tomorrow. Then I turned back to the papers spread across my dining table, mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I needed space to think, to plan, to decide on my next steps. I made a list of immediate actions: visit the properties, meet with the property management company, review the business stakes more thoroughly, set up a separate bank account for the income from Walsh Heritage Holdings. As I was finalizing my list, my phone rang again. It was Daniel. "Hey, where have you been?" he demanded without preamble. "Mom and Dad said you weren't answering their calls either." "I told you, I'm swamped with work," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. It felt strange to be talking to him now, knowing what I knew, holding this massive secret. "Well, you need to make time to come down to Henry's," he continued. "We've got a situation with the liquor license renewal, and Dad thinks you might be able to help since you're good with all that paperwork and regulation stuff." Of course. They weren't calling because they missed me or wanted to check in. They needed something. Specifically, they needed my skills to fix a problem with Daniel's business. "I'm pretty tied up this week," I said, a new confidence in my voice. "Maybe try hiring a consultant?" There are plenty of people who specialize in licensing issues. Are you serious right now? This is a family business, Emma. We can't afford to throw money at consultants for something you could handle in an afternoon. I almost laughed at the irony. Daniel had received over $200,000 from the family trust to start his bar, but apparently spending a few $100s on professional help was out of the question. It's your business, Daniel, not a family business, I corrected him gently. You and Dad made that pretty clear when you decided to use Grandpa's money to fund it without considering my input. He sighed dramatically on the other end of the line. Are you still hung up on that? Look, the trust was always meant to support family initiatives. Your career was already established. You didn't need the money like I did. Right, I said, thinking of the millions now technically under my control. I didn't need it. So you'll help with the license situation? He pressed, missing my sarcasm entirely. I hesitated, tempted to say no outright. But then I thought about Grandpa's letter, about building something meaningful, about responsibility. Maybe this was an opportunity to start reshaping my relationship with my family from a position of strength rather than resentment. I'll stop by tomorrow afternoon, I conceded. But Daniel, this is the last time I'm bailing you out for free. If you want my help going forward, we need to talk about a proper consulting arrangement. Consulting arrangement? You're my sister. Yes, and I'm also a professional whose time and expertise have value. Family or not, that deserves respect. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Fine, he finally said, clearly taken, aback by my newfound assertiveness. Tomorrow at 3. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions, nervousness about entering Henry's with my new knowledge, determination to establish better boundaries with my family, and a growing excitement about the possibilities that lay before me. Grandpa had trusted me with his legacy because he believed I would use it wisely. Now it was time to prove him right. What I didn't know then was that my visit to Daniel's bar the next day would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately force me to reveal everything about my inheritance and change my family dynamics forever. The next day, I arrived at Henry's precisely at 3 o'clock, dressed in my work clothes, a tailored navy blazer over a simple blouse and slim-fit trousers. It was my armor, in a way, the outfit I wore when I needed to feel competent and in control. And today, I needed that feeling more than ever. The bar was technically closed until 5, but the front door was propped open as staff prepared for the evening service. The interior was sleek and modern in a carefully calculated way. Exposed brick walls, original. Industrial pendant lights, new. Reclaimed wood tables, ironically not made by Grandpa, but purchased from a trendy manufacturer in Portland. In the corner, a jazz trio was setting up equipment for the night's entertainment. Daniel spotted me from behind the bar where he was inventorying bottles. Emma, finally, come to my office. I followed him to what had once been Grandpa's small design room, now converted into a cramped office with a glass desk and leather chair that looked expensive but uncomfortable. The only remaining feature from the room's previous life was the large bay window that Grandpa had installed to let in natural light for sketching. So here's the situation, Daniel launched in without preamble, pulling out a folder of papers. The renewal application for our liquor license got rejected because of some zoning technicality. Apparently, this building is in a historic overlay district with special regulations about establishments that serve alcohol. Dad's trying to talk to someone at the city council, but we need to file an appeal by Friday, or we'll have to stop serving, which would basically kill us. I took the folder and began reading through the rejection letter and attached documentation. This isn't a technicality, Daniel. When you converted this property from a workshop to a bar, you needed a variance from the Historic District Commission. Did you apply for one? He shrugged. Trevor handled all that paperwork stuff when we were setting up. He said everything was approved. Your business partner who you mentioned has restaurant experience through his family? The one I've never actually met? I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice. He's been in Chicago the past few weeks dealing with some family business, Daniel said defensively. But he definitely filed all the necessary permits. There must have been a mix-up. I continued reading. According to this, the commission never received an application for a variance. They're only flagging it now because the liquor license renewal triggered a review. I looked up at him. Where is Trevor now? Can he send over copies of the variance application he supposedly filed? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I've been trying to reach him, but he's not really responding. Look, can you just help me file this appeal so we don't lose our license while we sort this out? A suspicion began forming in my mind. Daniel, how much of the startup money did Trevor contribute? That's not relevant to the license issue, he said, avoiding my eyes. How much? I pressed. He sighed dramatically. Fine. He was supposed to put in $50,000, but there were some delays with his family sending the money. He contributed his expertise instead, which is just as valuable. So you put in all the money, I translated, using Grandpa's trust fund. It's a partnership, Daniel insisted. Trevor has the experience, I have the local connections, and yes, I provided the initial capital. That's how business works. I almost laughed. Here was my brother, who had never worked a steady job in his life, explaining how business works. To me, while simultaneously revealing he'd been conned by a so-called partner who had contributed nothing but empty promises. Where's the partnership agreement? I asked. The formal contract laying out ownership percentages, profit distribution, responsibilities? Daniel's silence was answer enough. Oh, Daniel, I sighed. You gave him access to the business accounts, didn't you? His face flushed. He needed to be able to pay vendors and handle operations when I wasn't here. I set the folder down and pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache forming. No wonder they were desperate for my help with the liquor license. The business was probably hemorrhaging money, and Daniel didn't even know the half of it. Before I could respond, the front door chimed, and I heard my parents' voices in the main bar area. Daniel? Emma? Are you here? My mother called out. Great. Just what this situation needed. An audience. They appeared in the doorway moments later, my father looking harried in a rumpled button-down and my mother with her concerned face already firmly in place. Oh good, you're both here, my father said, nodding at me curtly before turning to Daniel. I spoke with Councilman Pierce. He says there's nothing he can do about the license if the proper variance was never obtained. It's a commission issue, not a council one. That's what I was just explaining, I said, tapping the folder. According to these documents, no variance application was ever filed during the conversion process. My mother frowned. But surely Trevor handled all that. He's the one with the restaurant experience. I exchanged a look with Daniel, who at least had the decency to look embarrassed. It appears Trevor may not have been entirely forthcoming about his contributions to the business, I said diplomatically. My father's expression darkened. What does that mean exactly? Daniel cleared his throat. Trevor's been a little hard to reach lately, and Emma thinks there might be some issues with the partnership structure. Issues like Trevor hasn't actually invested any money, and there's no formal partnership agreement, I clarified, earning a glare from my brother. My mother gasped. Daniel, is this true? After everything we did to help you start this business? It's not as bad as she's making it sound, Daniel protested. Trevor has connections in the industry. He helped design the concept. He helped spend Grandpa's money. I cut in, unable to hold back. Money that was supposed to be for the family's benefit, remember? That was the justification for giving him everything. My father turned to me, frowning. Emma, I understand you're still upset about the trust allocation, but this isn't the time. Actually, I interrupted, a decision crystallizing in my mind. This is exactly the time. Because I might be able to help with the license situation, but you all need to understand exactly what happened with Grandpa's estate first. My mother looked confused. What are you talking about? The will was perfectly clear. The will that everyone knew about was clear, I agreed. But did any of you ever wonder why Grandpa spent so much time with me in his workshop? Why he taught me everything he knew about woodworking, about business, about recognizing quality? They stared at me blankly. 2 nights ago, I found something in Grandpa's old secretary desk, I continued. A journal he left specifically for me to find. And what was in that journal changes everything about how we understand his legacy. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the photos I'd taken of key pages from the journal and Fleming's documents, handing it to my father. Grandpa Henry wasn't just a small-town furniture maker. He was a shrewd businessman who built a real estate empire right under everyone's noses, and he left it all to me. The silence that followed was profound. My father scrolled through the photos, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. My mother peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening. Daniel stood frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. "This can't be real," my father finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's very real," I assured him. "I've met with Grandpa's other attorney, Marcus Fleming. I've reviewed all the documentation. Walsh Heritage Holdings owns 27 properties across 3 counties, plus minority stakes in several local businesses, including, ironically, Patterson's Brewery, which supplies this bar with most of its beer." Daniel snatched the phone from my father. "You're saying Grandpa was secretly rich? And he left everything to you? Why would he do that?" There was a note of genuine hurt in his voice that momentarily made me regret my dramatic revelation. But then I remembered years of being overlooked, of my contributions being taken for granted while Daniel was celebrated for simply showing up. "Because I showed interest in what he was building," I said simply. "I listened to his stories, learned his techniques, understood his philosophy about creating things of lasting value. You were always too busy for that, Daniel. Too focused on the next exciting thing." My father sank into a nearby chair, looking dazed. "Dad never said a word to me about any of this. We talked about his finances before he got sick. He told me the workshop, the house, and his savings were everything he had. Because he knew you wouldn't approve of his investment approach," I explained, recalling Grandpa's words in the journal. "He thought you would try to convince him to sell everything and put the money in something safe and predictable." "How much?" my mother asked abruptly. "How much is this inheritance worth?" I hesitated, but there was no point in hiding it now. "The properties alone are valued at about $8.3 million. There's also roughly $1.5 million in liquid assets that's been accumulating since his death. And the business investments generate additional income." Daniel made a strangled sound. My father's face had gone completely pale. "All this time," my mother whispered, "we thought we were being fair by giving Daniel the workshop and the trust money because you were already established in your career. We had no idea." "I know," I said, softening slightly. "Grandpa didn't tell anyone. He wanted me to find out on my own, after I'd already built my own life without expecting a windfall." My father looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "And now that you have found out, what do you intend to do with all this wealth?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment I'd discovered the truth. What was I going to do with my inheritance? I had ideas forming, but I wasn't ready to share them all yet. "First," I said, "I'm going to help save Daniel's bar. Not because I owe it to him, but because Grandpa would hate to see his workshop space fail, even in its new form." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You are?" "Yes. The Historic District Commission meets next Tuesday. I've already done some research, and there's a process for retroactive variances in special circumstances. I can prepare the application and make the case." I turned to look directly at my brother. "But if I do this, things are going to change around here." "What do you mean?" he asked warily. "I mean, I want to see all the financial records for this business. I want to know exactly how much of Grandpa's money has been spent and what there is to show for it. And I want a proper legal agreement drawn up that protects your investment, or rather, the family's investment. My father started to protest, but I held up a hand. I'm not doing this to punish anyone. I'm doing it because this was Grandpa's money that was meant to benefit the family, and right now it's being wasted on a business with no proper structure, no accountability, and apparently a partner who has vanished with who knows how much in his pocket. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. Fine, you can see the books, but I still don't understand why Grandpa would keep this massive secret from everyone except you. I sighed, trying to find the words to explain what I had come to understand from reading Grandpa's journal and letter. Grandpa believed in building things that last, I said carefully. Not just furniture, but wealth, security, legacy. He watched his own brother squander their parents' inheritance and vowed not to let the same thing happen to what he built. He saw in me someone who shared his values about patience, quality, and long-term thinking. I let that sink in before continuing. He didn't exclude any of you out of malice. He made a calculated decision about who would be the best steward of his life's work, and he wanted me to have the chance to find my own way first, to prove to myself what I was capable of before taking on that responsibility. My mother, always sensitive to perceived criticisms, bristled slightly. Are you saying Henry thought the rest of us were, what, irresponsible? Not good enough? I'm saying he made a choice based on who he thought would honor his intentions for the wealth he built, I replied evenly. And considering what's happening with just the small portion that went to the family trust, can you honestly say he was wrong? The question hung in the air between us, uncomfortable but undeniable. Daniel's bar was facing a crisis partially because of his own failure to properly vet his business partner and ensure all necessary permits were in place. The money from the trust, money I now knew was a tiny fraction of Grandpa's total assets, was potentially circling the drain. We should continue this conversation later, my father finally said, his voice strained. Right now, we need to focus on saving the bar. If Emma can help with this license situation, we should let her. I nodded, relieved to table the more emotional aspects of my revelation for now. I'll need copies of all the original building permits, the business license, any correspondence with the Historic Commission, and the complete financial records. Daniel hesitated. Some of that stuff might be disorganized. Then get organized, I said firmly. I'm willing to help, but I'm not going to waste my time if you're not serious about fixing this properly. My brother looked at me with new eyes, not with resentment, as I might have expected, but with something closer to respect. My parents, too, seemed to be recalibrating their understanding of me in real time. I'll pull everything together tonight, Daniel promised. Good. I'll come by tomorrow morning to go through it. I gathered my purse and headed for the door, then paused. And Daniel? Call your bank first thing and check the business accounts. Make sure Trevor hasn't helped himself to anything else on his way out the door. The look of alarm on his face confirmed he hadn't even considered that possibility. Some businessman. As I walked out of Henry's and into the late afternoon sunlight, I felt lighter somehow. The secret I'd been carrying for the past 2 days had been a burden, but also a shield. Now that my family knew the truth, or at least part of it, I could begin the real work of deciding what to do with my inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from Fleming. Checking in. How are you handling everything? I typed back. Family. Now knows about the inheritance. Helping with brother's business crisis first, then making longer-term plans. Would like to meet next week to discuss some ideas. His response came quickly. Available whenever you need. Your grandfather would be proud of your approach. Would he, though? I wasn't entirely sure. Grandpa had kept his wealth a secret for a reason. He had created a separate structure with a separate attorney, specifically to keep these assets away from the family dynamics that had always favored Daniel. And yet, as I drove away from the bar that had once been Grandpa's beloved workshop. I couldn't help but think that what he truly wanted wasn't for me to hide my inheritance away from my family, but to use it more wisely than they had used what they knew about. The next morning, I arrived at Henry's at 9, armed with my laptop and a clearer sense of purpose than I'd had in years. Daniel was already there, surprisingly, with several boxes of paperwork spread across the largest table in the bar. I was here until 2 in the morning sorting through everything, he admitted, looking exhausted but determined. And you were right about checking the accounts. Trevor transferred $18,000 to his personal account last week. I've already called the bank to dispute the transaction and freeze the accounts. I nodded, impressed despite myself. Maybe my brother was finally growing up. Good. Let's see what we're working with. For the next 3 hours, we sifted through the bar's financial records, permit applications, including several that had never actually been filed, and operational documents. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty. Henry's had been losing money from day one, propped up by increasingly desperate infusions of cash from the family trust. So that's it, Daniel said glumly when we had laid everything out. Even if we fix the license issue, the bar is basically bankrupt. I've wasted all of Grandpa's money on a failing business. There was a vulnerability in his voice I rarely heard, a genuine distress that made me see past the confident facade he usually maintained. Not necessarily, I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. The concept isn't bad, and the location is excellent. The problems are structural: poor inventory management, inconsistent staffing, no coherent marketing strategy, and of course, a partner who contributed nothing but took plenty. Daniel looked at me suspiciously. Why do you sound like you're considering helping beyond just the license issue? I took a deep breath. Because I might be, but not as a favor, and not by just throwing more money at the problems. If, and this is a big if, I decide to invest in saving this business, it would be as a proper partner, with clear terms, expectations, and control mechanisms. You want to take over my bar? He asked, his voice rising. I want to save Grandpa's legacy, I corrected him. This building meant something to him. It was the heart of his craft for 50 years. I hate seeing it struggle as a business that's not living up to its potential. Daniel stared at me for a long moment. You're serious? You would actually invest your inheritance money in my failing bar? A portion of it, I clarified, and only with significant changes to how things are run. But yes, I'm considering it. What I didn't say was that this was just the first step in a larger plan that was taking shape in my mind. A plan to honor Grandpa's legacy in a way that would transform not just Daniel's bar, but our entire family dynamic. A plan that would reveal just how visionary my quiet, unassuming grandfather had truly been. I need some time to think, Daniel said finally. This is a lot to process. I nodded, understanding. In the span of 24 hours, his perception of both me and our grandfather had been completely upended. He had gone from being the golden child who received everything to realizing he had gotten the smaller piece of the inheritance pie. And had mismanaged even that. Take the day, I said, gathering my notes. I'll work on the variance application for the Historic Commission. We can talk about the larger issues tomorrow. As I left the bar, my phone rang. It was my father. Emma, he said without preamble. Your mother and I would like to have dinner with you tonight. There are things we need to discuss about this inheritance situation. I had been expecting this call. Now that the shock had worn off, my parents would want to reassert their position, to find some way to regain control of the narrative, and possibly of Grandpa's assets as well. Dinner sounds fine, I agreed. But Dad, if this is going to be about trying to convince me to share the inheritance or put it into the family trust, save your breath. Grandpa was explicit about his wishes, and I intend to honor them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just come to dinner, Emma. We'll talk then. I agreed to meet them at 7, then called Fleming to brief him on the developments and get his advice for handling what was sure to be a challenging conversation. What I didn't know as I prepared for dinner was that my parents had uncovered something in their own search for answers, something that would force me to make decisions about my inheritance much sooner than I had planned, and that would test my resolve to honor Grandpa's legacy in ways I hadn't anticipated. I arrived at Bravino's, my parents' favorite Italian restaurant, promptly at 7. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu or decor in 20 years. White tablecloths, candles in wax-covered Chianti bottles, and a mural of the Tuscan countryside painted directly on the wall. My parents had been coming here for special occasions since before I was born, which made me wonder exactly what kind of occasion tonight was supposed to be. They were already seated in a corner booth, heads bent together in quiet conversation that ceased abruptly when they spotted me. My father stood to greet me with an awkward half-hug, while my mother simply nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Not a good sign. "You look nice," my father offered as I took my seat, a peace offering that felt hollow given the tension hanging in the air. "Thanks," I replied, smoothing my dress, a simple navy sheath that I'd chosen deliberately for its professional, no-nonsense appearance. "How are you both doing? Yesterday was a lot to process." My mother gave a small, humorless laugh. "You could say that again. Finding out your father had a secret real estate empire that none of us knew about, and that he left it all to you without saying a word to the rest of us. Yes, that was quite a lot to process." Already the claws were coming out. I signaled to the waiter for a glass of wine before responding. "I understand it was a shock," I said carefully. "It was for me, too. I had no idea about any of this until I found Grandpa's journal." My father cleared his throat. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss, Emma. After you left yesterday, your mother and I did some digging of our own. We called Patterson, who directed us to some old files in his office safe." A knot formed in my stomach. "What kind of files?" The waiter arrived with my wine and took our orders, an awkward interruption that stretched the moment of tension even further. When he finally departed, my father reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a letter your grandfather wrote to me a month before he died," he said, placing it on the table between us. "Patterson held it in safekeeping with instructions to give it to me only if certain questions were ever raised about his estate." I stared at the letter but didn't reach for it. "What does it say?" "Read it," my mother urged, pushing it toward me. "You need to understand the full story before we go any further." With reluctant fingers, I unfolded the letter. Unlike the journal and note Grandpa had left for me, this was typed and formal, more legal document than personal message. "Richard, if you're reading this, then Emma has discovered the assets I've left in her name through Marcus Fleming, and you've come to Patterson with questions. I owe you an explanation, though I had hoped it wouldn't be necessary. First, you should know that everything I've done has been with careful consideration for our family's future. The furniture business was always my passion, but it was my investment, activities that built our family's true wealth. I kept these activities separate from the workshop and our family life for many reasons, not least of which was my desire to live simply and without the complications that come with visible wealth. Chose Emma as the inheritor of these assets after years of careful observation. She possesses the temperament, judgment, and financial discipline needed to manage wealth responsibly. More importantly, she understands that creating things of lasting value requires patience and vision, qualities I've tried to instill in all of you, with varying success. However, there is a condition to Emma's inheritance that she doesn't yet know about. Fleming has instructions to inform her on the 5th anniversary of my death, when the final property transfers are scheduled to complete. The condition is this: for Emma to retain full control of Walsh Heritage Holdings, she must demonstrate that she can use these resources to benefit the entire Walsh family in a sustainable way. This doesn't mean simply distributing the money equally. That would defeat the purpose of my careful planning. It means she must find a way to use these assets to strengthen the family as a whole, to create opportunities that align with each person's abilities and character, and to establish a legacy that can benefit generations to come. If, in Fleming's judgment, Emma has not taken meaningful steps toward this goal by the 5-year mark, the ownership structure of Walsh Heritage Holdings will revert to a family trust with equal shares for you, Emma, and Daniel, with you as trustee. I know this. Arrangement may seem strange or even unfair, but I've lived long enough to see how sudden wealth can destroy families as easily as it can help them. This is my attempt to prevent that outcome for ours. I trust that, whatever happens, you will respect my wishes and the careful thought that went into them. Your father, Henry Walsh. I read the letter twice, my pulse quickening as the implications sank in. There was a condition to my inheritance, a test essentially, that I hadn't known about, and I had less than 2 years left to pass it. Well? My mother prompted when I finally looked up. What do you think of that? I took a long sip of wine, buying myself time to process. I think Grandpa was even more strategic than I realized, I finally said. Even from beyond the grave, he's still trying to shape our family dynamics. My father leaned forward. Emma, do you understand what this means? You haven't actually secured full ownership of these assets yet. There's still a very real possibility that they could become family property with equal shares for all of us. If I fail Grandpa's test, I pointed out, which I don't intend to do. But that's just it, my mother interjected. How can you pass a test you didn't even know about until now? For all we know, you've already failed by keeping the inheritance secret from us these past few days. I shook my head. No, that's not it. The letter is clear. I need to demonstrate that I can use these resources to benefit our family in a sustainable way. Not just split the money, but create something lasting that works for everyone. Like what? My father challenged. What exactly do you think Henry had in mind? That was the million-dollar question. Or rather, the $10 million question. What had Grandpa wanted me to do with his wealth? The journal had given me some clues about his philosophy, but nothing specific about this condition. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I think helping save Daniel's bar might be a start. It's a family business in Grandpa's original workshop. There's a certain symmetry there. My mother scoffed. One business that's already failing? That's hardly a sustainable plan for an entire family legacy. The waiter returned with our food, and we fell silent until he departed. I pushed my pasta around the plate, appetite gone as my mind raced. Why are you showing me this now? I finally asked. You could have kept it to yourselves and waited to see if I failed the condition. My parents exchanged glances. Because we're family, my father said. Despite what you might think, Emma, we don't want to see you fail. We want what's best for all of us. And what do you think that is? I asked warily. My mother set down her fork. We think the sensible approach is to acknowledge that this arrangement is unnecessarily complicated. You could simply agree now to establish the family trust as described in the contingency plan. Equal shares your father as trustee. Everyone benefits immediately without this stressful deadline hanging over your head. And there it was, the real purpose of this dinner. They wanted me to voluntarily give up control of the inheritance without even trying to meet Grandpa's condition. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want me to just hand over control of assets worth millions that Grandpa specifically entrusted to me based on a letter I just learned about, without even attempting to fulfill his wishes? It's the practical solution, my father insisted. Think about it. Even if you come up with some plan to benefit the family, Fleming is the one who judges whether it's sufficient. What if he decides it isn't? You'd lose everything anyway, after investing time and resources. This way, we all win. I stared at him, seeing with sudden clarity the mindset that had made Grandpa keep his wealth a secret all these years. My father, truly didn't understand the value of building something, of taking calculated risks, of having a vision beyond the safe and immediately practical. No, I said firmly. That's not how this is going to work. Grandpa chose me for a reason, and I'm going to honor his wishes by at least trying to meet his condition. If I fail, then yes, the assets will become a family trust. But I'm not giving up before I've even started. My mother's expression hardened. This is exactly the kind of stubborn pride Henry had, always thinking he knew better than everyone else. Maybe he did, I countered. He built an $8 million real estate portfolio while everyone thought he was just a small-town woodworker. That suggests he understood something about long-term planning that others missed. My father's jaw tightened. So that's your decision? You're going to gamble with all our futures based on some cryptic instructions from a dead man? The bluntness of his words stung, but I held firm. I'm going to respect Grandpa's wishes and the responsibility he entrusted to me. And frankly, I think you both should too. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother picked at her food while my father stared into his wine glass, clearly recalibrating his approach. What about Daniel's bar? He finally asked. You said yesterday you were considering helping. Is that still your intention? I nodded. Yes, but not as a handout. If I'm going to invest in saving Henry's, it will be as part of a comprehensive plan that aligns with Grandpa's vision. And what is that plan exactly? My mother pressed. The truth was, I didn't have a fully formed plan yet, but sitting here, faced with my parents' transparent attempt to wrest control from me, ideas were crystallizing rapidly in my mind. I'm still developing the details, I said carefully. But I'm thinking about creating something that honors Grandpa's legacy in more ways than just preserving his financial assets, something that combines his craftsmanship with his business acumen. My father looked skeptical. That sounds very abstract, Emma. For now, I acknowledged. But I'll have something concrete to present to both of you and Daniel within the week. My mother's eyes narrowed. You know, if you're planning to use these assets to control us or make us jump through hoops for your approval, that's hardly the family unity your grandfather wanted. That's not my intention at all, I assured her, though her comment revealed much about how she viewed family dynamics as a power struggle rather than a collaborative endeavor. What I want is to create something sustainable that plays to everyone's strengths and creates opportunities for all of us. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation about neutral topics. My parents clearly hadn't expected me to stand my ground so firmly, and they were regrouping. As we waited for the check, my father made one last attempt. Emma, before you commit to whatever plan you're developing, I want you to think about something. Your grandfather lived a very private life with very traditional values. The world has changed dramatically since he built his investments. What worked for him might not be the right approach for our family now. Maybe, I conceded. But the principles behind his success, patience, quality, vision, those are timeless. And that's what I plan to build on. We parted with awkward hugs and promises to talk soon. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and texted Fleming. Need to meet first thing tomorrow. There's a condition to my inheritance I just learned about. His response was immediate. I'm aware. Your grandfather's contingency plan. My office? 8 a.m.? So Fleming had known all along and hadn't told me. That was something we would definitely be discussing. The next morning, I arrived at Fleming's office prepared for battle, armed with a notebook full of questions and the beginning outlines of a plan. But before I could launch into my interrogation, he held up a hand. Before you ask, yes, I knew about the condition your grandfather placed on your inheritance, and no, I couldn't tell you about it until either the 5-year mark or until your father discovered the letter and informed you. Himself, whichever came first. I set my notebook down. That's a very specific instruction. Fleming nodded. Henry was nothing if not thorough in his planning. He wanted you to have time to establish yourself independently, to demonstrate your capabilities without the pressure of this condition hanging over you. But he also knew that once the family became aware of your inheritance, dynamics would change rapidly. They already have, I confirmed, recounting the dinner with my parents. They want me to give up control now and establish the family trust. Immediately. As Henry predicted, Fleming said with a slight smile. He understood your father's conservative approach to finances very well. So what exactly is this condition? The letter says I need to use these resources to benefit the entire Walsh family in a sustainable way. That's pretty vague. Fleming leaned back in his chair. Deliberately so. Henry didn't want to prescribe a specific solution. He wanted to see what you would create when given both resources and responsibility. The only firm requirements are that whatever you establish must 1. Provide genuine opportunities for all members of the Walsh family to participate according to their abilities. 2. Preserve and potentially grow the core assets rather than depleting them. And 3. Reflect the values Henry emphasized. Throughout his life, craftsmanship, sustainability, community investment, and creating things of lasting value. I frowned. And you're the one who judges whether I've met these criteria? Yes, though your grandfather left detailed guidance for how I should evaluate your efforts. It's not an arbitrary decision. I took a deep breath. Okay, then let's talk about what I'm considering. I spent most of last night thinking about this, and I have the beginnings of a plan. I'd like your feedback. For the next hour, I outlined my vision, transforming Walsh Heritage Holdings from a passive real estate investment company into an active business incubator focused on craftsmanship and sustainable enterprises. The existing properties would provide both physical locations and financial backing for a network of businesses that would combine traditional crafts with modern business models. Daniel's Bar would be just the first project, I explained. We'd revamp it to incorporate elements of Grandpa's woodworking legacy, maybe turn part of it back into a small demonstration workshop where local craftspeople could teach classes during the day, before it transitions to a bar at night. We'd source materials locally, create a farm-to-table food program, and establish it as a destination that honors tradition while being commercially viable. Fleming nodded thoughtfully. And how would this involve your parents and brother beyond just the bar? That's where the broader vision comes in, I continued. My father has always been good at systems and processes. He could oversee the operational aspects of the larger enterprise. My mother has her interior design background. She could help create cohesive aesthetics across the properties. And Daniel, for all his flaws, does have a talent for creating experiences that appeal to people. He could help develop concepts for some of the other locations. I pulled out a preliminary sketch I'd made of the organizational structure. Each family member would have a role suited to their strengths, with appropriate compensation and profit sharing. But the underlying assets would remain protected within the holding company structure, so we're building on Grandpa's foundation rather than chipping away at it. Fleming studied my notes with interest. This has potential. It honors Henry's craftsmanship, legacy while leveraging the real estate portfolio he built, and it creates defined roles for family members without simply handing them money. Exactly, I said, feeling a surge of confidence. It's not about controlling them or making them dependent on my approval. It's about creating a framework where everyone can contribute and benefit. What about the brewery connection? Fleming asked. Henry's stake in Patterson's brewery could tie in neatly with Daniel's bar. I've thought about that too, I acknowledged. We could create a special line of craft beers named after Grandpa's most famous furniture pieces, exclusively available at Henry's. It would be a way to tie the bar more directly to his legacy while leveraging the business stake he already established. Fleming made some notes, then looked up at me with a measured expression. You've put together a thoughtful framework here, Emma, but implementing it will be the true challenge. Your family may resist roles you've envisioned for them, preferring instead to simply receive distributions from the assets. I know, I sighed, especially my parents. They want the safe option, equal shares, simple trust, predictable income. They don't see the potential in building something larger. Which is precisely why Henry left these decisions to you, Fleming pointed out. He recognized in you someone who could see beyond the immediate and obvious uses of wealth. I gathered. My notes, feeling both energized and daunted by the task ahead. I need to refine this plan before presenting it to my family. Can we meet again in a few days to go over the details? Of course, Fleming agreed. In the meantime, I suggest you continue helping with Daniel's bar situation. It's a concrete way to demonstrate your commitment to using these resources for family benefit. As I left Fleming's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Need to talk ASAP. Trevor showed up. Says he has investors interested in buying us out. Meeting at the bar at noon. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the message. Trevor, the supposedly missing partner who had contributed nothing but taken $18,000 from the business account, was back with talk of investors? This had scam written all over it. On my way, I texted back. Don't agree to anything before I get there. My carefully developing plans for the family legacy would have to wait. Right now, I needed to stop my brother from making another potentially disastrous business decision. As I drove to Henry's, I couldn't help but wonder if this was exactly the kind of real-world test Grandpa had wanted me to face, proving I could protect family interests while building towards something greater. What I didn't realize was that Trevor's sudden reappearance and the investors he'd brought with him would lead to a revelation about Grandpa's past that none of us could have anticipated, a revelation that would change my understanding of his legacy and force me to make the hardest decision yet about the inheritance he'd left me. I arrived at Henry's to find the bar's front door locked despite the open sign still illuminated in the window. Peering through the glass, I could see Daniel seated at a table with two men. One I recognized as Trevor from photos on the bar's social media, and another older man in an expensive-looking suit who sat with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. I knocked sharply, and Daniel's head jerked up. He looked relieved as he hurried to let me in. "Thank God you're here," he muttered as he ushered me inside. "I have no idea what to do with these guys." "Just introduce me and let me do the talking," I whispered back. Trevor stood as we approached. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the practiced smile of a career salesman. "You must be Emma, the sister I've heard so much about." "Trevor Blackwood." He extended his hand. I shook it briefly, keeping my expression neutral. "Interesting timing for your return, Trevor. Daniel mentioned you've been unreachable for weeks." "Business in Chicago took longer than expected," he replied smoothly. "But it was worth it, because I brought back an incredible opportunity. This is Victor Harrington." The older man stood, assessing me with shrewd eyes. "Ms. Walsh, your brother tells me you've recently taken an interest in this establishment's operations." "You could say that," I replied. "And you are—" "Victor represents Landmark Hospitality Group," Trevor jumped in. "They're interested in acquiring Henry's. As part of their boutique bar collection." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? A business that hasn't turned a profit since opening and is currently facing licensing issues? That seems like an unusual acquisition target," Victor chuckled. "Direct. I appreciate that." He gestured for us to sit. "Let me be equally direct. We're interested in this property primarily for its location and historic character. The business itself is secondary, though the concept has potential with proper management and capital. Investment. They're offering $450,000, Daniel blurted out, for the business and the building. I kept my expression neutral with effort. The workshop property alone was worth at least $600,000 in the current market, possibly more given its location in the historic district. This wasn't just a bad deal, it was practically theft. "That's significantly below market value," I observed. Victor shrugged. We're accounting for the outstanding issues with permits, the business's current financial state, and the necessary renovations. It's a fair offer considering the circumstances. Trevor leaned forward. Emma, this is a golden parachute. The bar is struggling. The licensing issue could shut us down completely, and Daniel would walk away with cash in hand instead of mounting debts. Something about Victor's demeanor kept nagging at me. The way he studied the room, the calculated confidence in his posture. He reminded me of someone, though I couldn't place who. Before we discuss this further, I said carefully, I'm curious why Landmark Hospitality is so interested in this specific property. There are other historic buildings in better condition available downtown. Victor and Trevor exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. Location, primarily? Victor answered. This corner has excellent visibility and foot traffic, and, frankly, the building's history as a long-standing workshop gives it a narrative appeal our company values. Its history as Henry Walsh's workshop, specifically? I pressed. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, actually, the Walsh name has certain associations in this region that align with our brand values. That's when it clicked. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo gallery where I'd saved images from Grandpa's journal, and scrolled until I found what I was looking for. A faded photograph from the 1970s showing Grandpa standing with a group of men outside a construction site. One of those men looked remarkably like a younger version of Victor Harrington. I turned the phone toward him. You knew my grandfather. Victor's composed expression faltered momentarily. Henry and I had some business dealings years ago, yes. This region was developing rapidly back then, and many of us worked together on various projects. What kind of business dealings? I asked, my suspicion growing. Victor sighed, glancing at Trevor, who suddenly looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Ms. Walsh. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my brother, I insisted. Victor sat back, considering me for a long moment. Very well. Your grandfather and I were investment partners in several early development projects around Mapleton and Riverside. The partnership ended, less than amicably when we disagreed about the direction of a major development. What development? Daniel asked, finally finding his voice. Riverside Commons, Victor replied. The shopping center and office complex on the north side of town. Henry wanted to preserve the historic mill building and incorporate it into the design. I wanted to demolish it for more efficient use of the space. Henry bought out my share, at significant personal cost, to prevent the demolition. I remembered that complex. It was one of the most successful commercial properties in the region, with the renovated mill as its centerpiece. The development was widely praised for balancing historic preservation with modern functionality, and according to Grandpa's journal, it was one of his most profitable investments. And now you want to buy his workshop, I said, the pieces falling into place. The building he specifically left to the family rather than including in my inheritance. Trevor shifted nervously. Wait, what inheritance? Victor's eyes sharpened with interest. Yes, what inheritance? I ignored them both, turning to Daniel. Did you know anything about this history? He shook his head, looking bewildered. No idea. But Emma, does it matter? If they're willing to buy the place, it matters, I cut him off. Because this isn't a random offer from a hospitality group looking to expand. This is Victor trying to acquire the workshop that symbolized Grandpa's victory in their old dispute. It transitions to the bar, but one with a clear identity rooted in Grandpa's legacy. Craft cocktails served on tables made in-house, exhibits showcasing local artisans, events that bring together makers and community. For the first time, I saw genuine interest spark in my brother's eyes. That actually sounds pretty cool. Different from anything else in town. Exactly. And it's just the beginning. The other properties in Walsh Heritage Holdings could become a network of similar spaces. each highlighting different traditional crafts while functioning as viable businesses. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, thinking, "What role do you see for me in all this?" "Besides lending my golden child status to convince Mom and Dad," he added with a self-deprecating smile. "You're good with people, Daniel. You create experiences, build atmosphere. In this new vision, you could be the public face, the one who translates traditional craftsmanship into experiences that modern customers connect with." He looked surprised. "You'd trust me with that? After I nearly ran this place into the ground?" "With proper structure and support, yes," I said honestly. "We all have strengths. Yours just need the right framework to shine." Something shifted in his expression, a new seriousness I rarely saw. "What do we do about Victor and Trevor?" They didn't seem like the type to take no for an answer. "First, we need to legally remove Trevor from the business," I said. "Fleming can help with that. As for Victor, his interest in this property tells me we're onto something valuable. Grandpa wouldn't have fought to keep that mill building if he didn't see its worth beyond dollars and cents." "So we're really doing this?" Daniel asked, a cautious hope in his voice. "Reinventing the family business?" "We're proposing it," I corrected. "First, we need Mom and Dad on board. I'm meeting with Fleming tomorrow to finalize the framework. Then I want to present the full plan to the family." Daniel nodded, then held out his hand across the table. "I'm in, Emma. Whatever you need to make this work, I'm with you. It's time I started living up to whatever potential Grandpa might have seen in me, too." I shook his hand, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. Maybe this was what Grandpa had intended all along, not just preserving his wealth, but healing the subtle fractures in our family relationships through a shared purpose. The next evening, I stood in my parents' living room, a comprehensive presentation prepared on my laptop. Daniel sat nearby, lending silent support. My parents watched warily as I connected to their television. "Before I begin," I said, "I want to thank you both for listening. What I'm about to propose isn't just about fulfilling Grandpa's condition or preserving his assets. It's about creating something new that honors his values while moving our family forward together." My father crossed his arms. "We're listening." I took a deep breath and launched into the presentation. 20 slides, detailing the Walsh Family Legacy Initiative. It outlined a holding company structure that would transform Grandpa's properties into a network of craft-centered businesses, each designed to be commercially viable while preserving traditional skills. The plan included specific roles for each family member based on their strengths, clear governance rules to prevent conflicts, and financial projections showing sustainable growth. The bar, Henry's workshop as we'd rename it, would be our flagship, I explained, showing renderings of the reimagined space. But it would be just the beginning. Mom, your interior design expertise would be crucial for creating cohesive aesthetics across all the properties. Dad, your organizational skills would be perfect for developing the operational systems, and Daniel has already agreed to lead the experiential aspects. As I concluded, I noticed my mother dabbing at her eyes. "Henry would have loved this," she said softly, surprising me. "This is exactly the kind of legacy he always talked about creating, but never seemed to pursue." My father was quieter, studying the financial projections with careful attention. "The structure is sound," he finally admitted, "but implementation will be challenging. Transforming existing properties while maintaining revenue streams, establishing new businesses in unproven sectors, there are significant risks." "Yes," I agreed. "That's why we need to approach this as a family, each of us contributing our strengths to make it work." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like respect in his eyes. "You've thought this through more thoroughly than I expected." "Is that a yes?" Daniel asked, leaning forward eagerly. My parents exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. "It's a qualified yes," my father finally said, "with the understanding that we'll establish clear governance procedures and regular family councils to address any issues that arise." Relief and excitement washed over me. This was just the beginning of what would surely be a complex journey. But the first, and perhaps hardest, hurdle had been cleared. As my parents and Daniel began discussing details, my phone vibrated with a text from Fleming. Victor Harrington just offered to buy 3 of the Walsh heritage properties, offering well above market value. Coincidence? I smiled to myself. No, definitely not a coincidence. Victor had recognized what I was beginning to understand myself, that Grandpa's legacy was worth far more than the sum of its parts. But unlike Victor, I had no intention of dismantling what Henry Walsh had so carefully built. Instead, I was going to transform it into something even he couldn't have imagined. A family legacy that would honor his craftsmanship, his business acumen, and his faith in me, the granddaughter who had finally discovered what he had really left her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.